Hello, and welcome to another episode of Her Entrepreneurial Rise, the podcast where we amplify the stories of women and gender expansive leaders using entrepreneurship as a force for social change. Because their stories aren't just inspiring, they're blueprints for what's possible when equity leads the way. I'm your host, Kellen Tamarian, and I could not be more excited to introduce today's guest, April Haberman, co-founder and CEO of MiDOViA. MiDOViA is a trailblazing menopause support platform dedicated to transforming the way we understand menopause and support the needs of menopausal women in the workplace and beyond. Through strategic partnerships with employers, MiDOViA implements menopause-friendly workplace policies by providing tailored training for HR teams, leadership, and managers. Their comprehensive approach culminates in a formal menopause-friendly membership and accreditation, validating an organization's commitment to building inclusive, supportive environments where employees can thrive through every stage of midlife. But MiDOViA's impact goes beyond the workplace. For individuals, MiDOViA offers personalized support through one-on-one health coaching, community memberships, virtual wellness programming, expert-led webinars, and retreats. Whether navigating symptoms, exploring hormonal health, or building confidence during life transitions, individuals receive compassionate, evidence-based care rooted in holistic well-being. Through her commitment to addressing menopause as both a personal and cultural experience, April is scaling MiDOViA to build a future where midlife is not a barrier to, but a beginning for equitable support, developing confidence, and facilitating collective empowerment. I am so honored to be speaking with her today, and I know her story and her unwavering dedication to using entrepreneurship as a force for social change will leave you feeling both inspired and deeply connected to MiDOViA's mission. So with that, let's dive in. Hi, April. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks so much. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, me too. So to kind of just jump right in, I'm curious what inspired you to create MiDOViA. How did your lived experiences as a woman in the workplace inform your understanding that there are gaps in the support systems in corporate environments for women navigating the transition to menopause?
It's a great question, and I'll shorten the story a little bit for you, just for sake of time. But I spent over the past, decade or more in the sexual reproductive health space, specifically in menstrual health, in nonprofit and development. I was talking about periods before it was popular, right? With corporations, even sitting with women and having conversations about period poverty. They were uncomfortable, shifting in the seat, purple faces. No, I don't want to talk about it. And I realized over a decade ago that if we're uncomfortable talking about menstruation and we menstruate, what does it look like in the workplace? Right? What does it look like if we have challenges with menstruation? And as I grew into the menopausal stage, and many of my friends moved into that menopausal, postmenopausal stage, because I had that background in menstrual health, I began to receive a lot of questions from them. Are you experiencing this? What about this? Am I in menopause? Am I in perimenopause? And I quickly realized that there was a lack of support. There was a lack of education. There was a lack of resources and a lot of misinformation out there. And so, together with my co founder, who's also a health coach, Kim Hart, we decided that we were going to do something about it. We decided that we wanted to change the landscape so that our daughters didn't have to suffer when they reached menopausal age. So we started MiDOViA almost, I don't want to call it naively, but we were somewhat naive going into this space. We knew we wanted to help women. We thought we were going to launch with just retreats and health coaching because that was really what we wanted to lean into at the time. And then there was an article in the New York Times that came out about, I'm losing track of time, 2 years ago, over 2 years ago now. And there was a quote from someone named Deborah Garlick from Henpicked in the workplace out of the UK. And she mentioned menopause in the workplace support and some data that was really intriguing to me. So I placed a phone call to her. And after multiple conversations with her, I quickly realized that there was a gap in the market. There was a blank space, and no one in the US was supporting women in the workplace with menopause. And it's interesting, Helen, because It never even dawned on me, my own personal story and my struggles with menopause when I reached early menopause at work at the height of my career, that that was a hurdle because I think women are so used to just rolling up our sleeves and doing what we have to do and struggling through it and powering through it. That I really didn't stop to take the time to think, you know what? This was holding me back. And thank goodness I had an employer that was flexible at the time. Otherwise, I would have had to have quit my job due to my menopause symptoms. And so the more we dug into that and the more we started looking at the data, we realized that women were leaving the workplace. They were suffering in silence. They were considering leaving their high powered jobs. And to me, that's sad. We've worked our entire careers to get where we are. We shouldn't have to leave the workplace due to menopause symptoms because of education, lack of education and support. So we started MiDOViA. So here we are.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, I think it's so inspiring that you leveraged your lived experience and your knowledge in the kind of menstrual justice, menstrual equity space of recognizing that people, even those who menstruate, are uncomfortable talking about it because of the way that we are conditioned to understand menstruation, menstrual health, and recognizing that that also transferred over to menopause and how people talked about it and how they related to it. And then recognizing that people aren't comfortable talking about it. And then if they're not comfortable talking about it, of course, there aren't going to be supports available because no one wants to touch that topic. And with the fact that there are no supports available, these women like yourself that have worked so hard to get where they are and shouldn't have to leave a career or an environment where they feel like they are empowered in their capabilities as an intelligent person contributing meaningfully to their workplace or to the goals of their corporate environment, that given their menopause symptoms, if they're not allowed to talk about it because no one is comfortable touching that subject, they aren't really able to ask for support. And the support doesn't exist because, again, nobody wants to talk about it. It's like this catch-22. And so I think it is really powerful that you leveraged all of your lived experiences from different points in your life of your personal experience entering the menopause transition and recognizing that, oh, I might even feel like I need to leave my corporate environment because my symptoms are debilitating, but I can't really talk about it because it's not a this topic writ large is not something that people are comfortable talking about. So how can I bridge that gap and help myself, but also the hundreds and thousands of women across the country that are in this same position as I am? I think that's really, really inspiring. And to kind of what you um, stated earlier in terms of the data, there's an absolute need for this at scale. I mean, an estimated 1.3 million women in the US enter menopause every year, and over 75% of women are in the labor force during their menopause transition. Yet, according to a study conducted by Catalyst, which for all of you listeners, that will be available in the show notes for you to check out on your own. But Catalyst is a global nonprofit organization promoting gender equity and workplace inclusion. They report that 84% of women globally say more workplace support for menopause is needed, but it doesn't exist. So I think you already kind of started to touch on this, but I'm curious how MiDOViA actively works to help employers implement menopause-friendly workplace policies and initiatives.
Yeah. We work with different industries, various industries of all sizes, smaller organizations with 40 employees to, large global organizations that cross various countries, thousands of employers, different work environments, for example. So we've seen it all. And what we've learned is that every single organization is unique. There are certainly best practices that we are able to extract from working with those hundreds of employers that we certainly implement. However, I think that customized, bespoke programming is really important. So, what we try to do when we talk to clients or potential clients initially is to get to know them, to build that relationship and to really understand their organizational structure, their employee demographic, that there's intersectionalities that we have to look at. We have to almost broaden the net, if you will, as we pull that data. I think there's a misconception that we just need to look at women that are 50 plus within the
Mhm.
organization, and that's not true. We need to look at the 20% of people that were born with ovaries that aren't reaching menopause at an average age. Outside of the average, there's early menopause, premature menopause, the surgical medically induced menopause, and then different gender expressions, for example, that can also
Mhm.
reach menopause. So we have to look at that and cast that net, help them to pull that data to understand their demographics, and then really help them to craft surveys within their organization. So, really asking their employees what they want, what they need. You mentioned it earlier that, if organizations aren't supporting menopause or don't have that in place, and therefore people don't want to talk about it because the culture doesn't allow for that, it's this catch 22, right?
Mhm.
So, surveying the employees, understanding what they need and want, introducing benefits. So we really dig in and look at their benefits packages as well. What do you have? What's covered? What's not covered? What can you introduce? Do you have EAP programs? Do you have employee resource groups or community groups that can offer that support as well? And then how are you going to educate? How are you going to educate? How are you going to train your employees? Because it's really important that everyone across all levels of the organization are trained, from managers to HR professionals, all the way out to line workers, retail workers, if that's your industry, to make sure that everyone is singing off the same song sheet. Everyone has the same information so that we alleviate myths and misconceptions, because what we don't want to do is to create more ageism. And we don't want to create a misconception that women are not capable anymore. If we
Mhm.
talk about 34 plus symptoms that a person can experience in menopause, if we're only coming into an organization and training and saying, you know what, you can experience 34 symptoms and that you can have brain fog and irritability and, you name it, if that's where I stop with an organization, I may have done more harm than good, because
Mhm.
now I have this misconception, right, that I'm incapable, right? I've painted a picture that I'm going to be less productive, that I'm not going to be present. And so it's important for everyone to understand, yes, you might experience 34 symptoms, up to 34 symptoms, for example, but with the right support in place, that's not a long-term death sentence, so to speak, right? So it really is crafting that custom bespoke program, creating that rollout strategy so that it makes sense, and then really reviewing that on a regular basis so that we're looking not only at that impact, but whether or not we need to pivot at any point as well, and keeping that regular drumbeat of information and education and conversation going so that we begin to normalize the conversation within the workplace.
Yeah, yeah. I think I really appreciated what you mentioned in terms of how it needs to be like what you just said, in terms of an ongoing kind of conversation of increasing the amount of education and awareness that everyone in the organization has in terms of what menopause can look like for their employees. And in terms of what you mentioned about rolling it out from senior leadership all the way to line workers and retail workers, depending on the industry, that everyone needs to be aware of how the menopause transition can impact. I feel like I wanna be, I guess, careful in terms of the way that I speak about it, just because of what you said, and that di kind of, making the declaration that, "Oh, when you are entering this transition, you can experience up to 34 symptoms," and recognizing that that cannot be the place that you stop the conversation, because then that can place women and those who enter the menopause transition, placing them at a deficit because of a kind of biological reality that they're experiencing, but that's not the case. They're not less capable. They just need additional supports. So framing the language in that way and ensuring that everyone in the organization has the knowledge and understanding that it's not that, oh, when my coworker or when my employee reaches this stage in their life that they become inept, but it's how can I support them so that they can continue to be as valuable as they always have been for us. And so I think that from an outsider's perspective, you might almost think, oh, I just need to talk to the CEO of this organization. I just need to talk to the manager so that they can then talk to the rest of their employees and say, okay, we're learning about this stage in a good portion of our employees' lives. Now we can disseminate that information to the rest of the team. But it really, I think, if you're looking to shift a culture, which is what needs to occur here to ensure that all people who enter menopause are supported, you have to communicate with everyone at every level and have a open dialogue to continue the conversation so that when new information comes in or when kind of new best practices might emerge in terms of how to best support um, people that are in their menopause transition based on the evidence that comes in, that everyone is equipped with the information to provide as much support as possible. And I think that this really kind of builds into the next question that I had for you, in that women over 50 are now one of the fastest growing demographics in the workforce in the US and globally. Menopause symptoms of the up to 34 symptoms that you mentioned, some can be fatigue, poor sleep, reduced concentration, hot flashes, etc. And like you mentioned, these can have a real impact on productivity and work performance. People might feel that they need to leave the workplace, like you mentioned, because of these symptoms. So I'm curious how MiDOViA positions this reality to companies and organizations that you work with, and that you want as customers that may still see menopause as a quote unquote personal issue rather than a workplace equity concern. How do you kind of communicate that this is a business case for you as well?
Yeah, great question. And I would like to answer that question. Honestly, I wish I could answer the question by saying it's the right thing to do.
Mm,
And it is the right thing to do. We
right.
need to support women in the workplace, to keep them in the workplace because they are valuable, right? We
Hmm.
have incredible knowledge and experience that we bring to the table, especially in that midlife age range and beyond. We want to keep women in the workplace. We want to retain that knowledge and talent. Unfortunately, a lot of organizations aren't going to do it just because it's the right thing to do. So we typically will start with the business case. And some of the numbers that you just mentioned, there's no need for me to repeat them. However, that's important data.
Hmm.
So we help whoever it is that we're working with. Let's just say it's an HR professional, just for sake of example here, who really is eager to fold in menopause support within the organization. We'll help that individual build that business case. So there's a lot of data, there's a lot of numbers that we can give them that's based on actual data. There's a lot of misinformation out there as well, but we help them to build the business case, the financial case, if you will. So, what's in it for me is really the question that we try to answer for the organization. What's the cost of doing nothing? Right? That's a choice as well. So, what does that look like for you, XYZ organization? If you decide to keep it right here, stop right here. How's that going to hit your bottom line? Because it will. It costs on average 3 to 4 times an annual salary to place an individual all in. So someone making $40,000 a year, it's going to cost that company $30,000 to replace that individual. The cost of menopause programming is significantly less than just losing one employee with your organization. So those are the types of conversations that we have. We build the business case and then really move into the legal case as well. There are legal protections for individuals in the workplace, and we're beginning to see that even gain traction beyond, your Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, for example, that was just introduced last week, doesn't have specific language that spells out menopause, but you're protected under that. Rhode Island, for example, just passed the first bill requiring employers to offer menopause accommodations for those that are experiencing menopause symptoms that can be debilitating. there's 20 other bills on the table in other states. So legislation is beginning to change as well. So we help them to understand, what's your risk, again, of doing nothing if you don't implement menopause support. And then we slowly move into that demographic case. 3 in 4 women will experience menopause symptoms. 1 in 4 will experience them in a severe manner. Typically, it's the 1 in 4 that will consider leaving the workplace. And we provide some of that data and then move into it's the right thing to do. Bottom line, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so there's 4 areas that we really focus on. Typically, again, starting with the business case, the financial case, and moving into social responsibility case.
Yeah, I really appreciate that kind of shift in perspective, or that might not be the right word, but the kind of acknowledging that from your personal standpoint, this is the right thing to do. And I 100% agree with you. And I think that most people hopefully do. But recognizing that it's important to address the leadership at an organization and acknowledge that there is something in this for you as well for a myriad of reasons. Financially, this makes the most sense for you in the future and success of your business, your company, or organization. That if 3 in 4 women experience menopausal symptoms and 1 in 4 in a severe case, and the women and individuals that experience menopause over age 50 are a growing demographic in the workforce, you're only going to see more and more of your employees enter the stage. And if they're not supported, they're not going to necessarily be able to contribute as meaningfully or with as much excellence as they had prior, because they're suffering. They're dealing with symptoms that are inhibiting their ability to perform in the way that they want to, in the way that they want to show up. So financially, it makes sense for you to support them so that you can continue to grow and succeed as a company. And then also iterating that, I think starting there and then moving into the discussion of kind of placing a human kind of spin on it, in the sense that you shouldn't even necessarily have to do that, but recognizing that these are real people that are suffering as a result of these symptoms, and it's the right thing to do to support them, not only because it benefits you, but because we all want to feel well in
Yeah.
our
Mhm.
everyday lives and in the workplace. And so as an organization, you should want to be a part of that culture shift, but also providing the legal case as well, that if you don't kind of step up to the plate here and create a culture that is inclusive and informed around this issue, you're going to be behind the 8 ball. And that also has financial implications for you going forward, because no one's going to want to work for you
Right.
if they're not certain that they'll feel supported. So I think that it's important to recognize that sometimes when you're addressing an equity issue, even though it might feel like, I wish I could just say, you should care as much as I do because this is so important, you have to kind of massage the issue a little bit so that people understand from their own standpoint how this makes sense, and then can acknowledge that, oh, of course, this is the right thing to do, because now that I see the benefits for everyone on all sides, of course, I'm going to step up to the plate and
Mhm.
do the right thing.
Right. That becomes the given, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the sentence, it becomes the given. And I also want to mention here too, we're talking about women, people with ovaries that were born with ovaries, that experience menopause, but males are affected as well. Our male colleagues are affected. Our relationships are affected with those menopausal symptoms that cause challenges for individuals as well. We know that women in their 50s have a higher divorce rate right now.
Mhm.
It's rising. Does it have something to do with menopause? Who knows? I think it does. I think the lack of support, the lack of understanding is a piece of that. Lack of communication. And when I say lack of understanding, I mean from both sides, right? I think men want to understand, they want to help innately. They just don't know what they don't know. And we often talk to a lot of males in the workplace who truly do want to support their colleagues and even their loved ones, their own partners and their own people, in their lives that are experiencing menopause. So I don't want to miss that point either. I mean, 50% of the population will experience menopause directly, but the other 50% indirectly. And we
Hmm.
often, use the example of someone sleeping next to a person that's experiencing hot flashes or heavy flooding bleeding. You're up in the middle of the night too if you're sleeping next to this person. So your sleep patterns are affected, which can also cause fatigue and that irritability and the brain fog and that lack of clarity. So it's not just the individual that's experiencing menopause that is
Hmm.
affected by those menopausal symptoms. Again, it's that broader net that we
Hmm.
need to begin to look at. And we need male allies, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective as well. Yeah, because it has a ripple effect that if the individuals experiencing the symptoms are not supported, then those that are in close proximity to or in relationship with the individual experiencing the symptoms are also affected. And then they can't necessarily show up as effectively as they might want to the workplace because they're fatigued. And so it's providing support and ensuring that workplaces are equipped to support individuals when they're at work, and beyond, that only is going to help everyone in the long term. And so I think that just then again bolsters that business case and really emphasizes why this issue is so important to address and why MiDOViA is such an important organization to exist, because this the ripple effects of a lack of support and education around menopause can have a devastating impact on productivity of and success of the individual and of businesses at large. And I think that this kind of stair steps into my next question as well, in terms of the individualized support that MiDOViA offers to women, and specifically women across differences of race, because a growing body of research indicates that menopause affects women differently based on race and or ethnicity. For instance, Black women experience menopause symptoms for an average of over 10 years, which is nearly twice as long as white women. And at the same time, Black women and women of color at large also face intersectional discrimination at work that may inhibit their ability to receive the necessary workplace support to navigate their menopause transition. So, how does MiDOViA's individualized support offerings, such as expert menopause guidance, one-on-one support, and evidence-based events and resources, step in to provide that necessary support to all menopausal women across differences of race?
Yeah, it's a really great point. Um, and it comes back to that casting the broader net, right? We need to look at the individual person. We need to look at that intersectionality that you just
Hmm.
mentioned. Excuse me. So, from an organizational perspective, we make sure that as we're pulling that demographic information, that that's understood and that that data is pulled. And when we work with individuals, again, it's really that customized approach. Right. So if I have a Black woman that I'm coaching, I'm certainly going to look at that data different or that case different than if I'm sitting in front of you, right? Coaching you through menopause. So it's really being curious. It's really understanding the individual, looking at not just race, ethnicity, but the social constructs that they live in, that they work in as well. Do you have a web of support, right? Who is going to help you through this time period if you need it? Where's your support system? Do you have a support system? What does healthcare access look like for you, too? Because that's going to vary oftentimes based on, your demographic, economic status, your
Hmm.
race, your ethnicity. So we have to look at the full picture when we're working with individuals in order to give them that customized support in order for them to get the care that they need. So it comes back to, I guess, that one word is customized. It's a really customized approach. The events that we host are really just awareness sessions. We want to make sure that everyone has evidence-based, science-based information so that we can somewhat clear through the muck, for lack of a better way of saying that. Lighten the noise, and to make sure that individuals are receiving adequate, accurate information.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that idea of customized care that you're pointing to is really when I learned about MiDOViA and what you're doing, I felt like it was that word customized came to mind for me, that it's not only ensuring that when women and individuals that experience the menopause transition come to work, that they're supported in their workplace, but they're also supported in their lives outside of the workplace with those awareness sessions and the expert led kind of coaching sessions and resources that are available, that they're supported on both sides, or on all sides, that they're supported in the workplace and also in their individual lives. And I think that that individual support also kind of points back to what you were saying earlier in terms of the men or those that are in relationship with the individual going through the menopause transition, that if they have those kind of additional individualized customized supports outside of the workplace, that person who's in a relationship with or in close proximity to the person experiencing menopause, they can then learn from, okay, they're learning these ways to support themselves in their, day-to-day lives outside of the workplace. How can I also contribute to that support? Or how can I learn from what they're learning to then ensure that they have what they need outside of the workplace as well, so that they're supported all around. And I think that acknowledging that everybody's needs, depending on age, depending on race, depending on severity of symptoms, are going to look different. Providing broad education through the resources that MiDOViA offers is so important, but also what's even more important in what you're doing is that you acknowledge that everybody's needs are going to look different, and you tailor your offerings to those individualized needs. I think that that's really writ large missing from a lot of the ways that we approach healthcare, is that sometimes I think we try to provide a one size fits all approach because we acknowledge that it works for certain people, but also recognizing that like there are 8 billion plus people on the planet and everybody's different. So recognizing that treatment needs to look different is really important as well. So I really love that
Mm.
the emphasis on customization is there, because I think that's so, so important. It can't be neglected.
I mean, a part of too, a lot of what we do is help signpost where to get help. That's the two questions that we get often are, who do I see? I don't know where to go, where to go to get help. So it's really helping individuals build their tribe, as we like to call it, build your tribe. And for anyone that is, you know, pre-menopause and you haven't quite entered that perimenopause stage, I would say build your tribe, now, so that when you do reach perimenopause and you do begin to experience symptoms, you're ready.
Yeah.
Women can see 3 to 7 doctors before they get the help that they need, and they just really don't know where to go to get the help. So we help them to figure that out. Who do you see? What does your insurance cover? What do you want your menopause care plan to look like? Do you want to take a more natural route? Do you want traditional Western medicine and hormone therapy? What is it that you're looking for? What is it that you're seeking? And then the second question that we get is, how do I have a conversation with my partner or my kids, so that they understand what I'm going through? So it goes back to what you were saying and what we've been talking about, and how menopause can affect relationships, and the importance of an individual understanding what's happening to her body, so that she can then communicate that effectively, and really effectively, in a way that opens up the dialogue for that and allows for that supportive environment.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the idea that you were just speaking to in terms of how women and individuals experiencing menopause don't necessarily know where to go to get help. So a part of the work that you do is providing education about these are the questions that you can and might need to be asking your provider in terms of how do I approach this stage of my life if I'm interested in approaching it from that kind of more Western perspective or more natural perspective. How do I then have conversations with my family and my partner and my kids if that's important, or if that's relevant to the individual's life? How do I create a ecosystem of support, but also of knowledge to be most informed about how I can step into this next stage of my life feeling empowered with education and information, but also empowered in terms of the decisions that I'm making, because I have all of the knowledge about these are the questions I need to be asking. These are the places that I can go to get help. And for me, based on my particular needs and wants, these are the resources that I need to be kind of incorporating into my daily life so that I feel like I can show up as the best and most authentic version of myself, and so that I can navigate these symptoms with more ease. I think that it just kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier in terms of how I really, really appreciate the holistic kind of all around perspective that MiDOViA is taking in terms of approaching the menopause transition, is acknowledging that it's not only creating and ensuring that women and individuals experiencing menopause are supported in the workplace, but they're supported in their individual lives in terms of the information that they have to approach this issue with confidence, but also the information that they have to then share with those that are in close proximity to them of this is what I'm experiencing, this is how I'm working to support myself, and this is how you can also work to support me so that we can all thrive together. I think that that's just great, and I don't think that there's a way that this issue could be approached differently and ensure that the outcomes are as positive as they have been.
Yeah. We don't live in a bubble.
Yeah.
I always say we can't leave menopause at the door, whether that's your door to your home or your door to your workplace. It's not something that we leave there. It's a part of who we are and it affects us in every aspect of our lives. Yeah.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
doesn't mean because it affects us that we're disabled. Right?
Mhm.
It just means that we need support to get through that stage of life and we can thrive. That's the great news. It's a wonderful part of life. Listen, when we don't have periods anymore, it's fantastic. So we menstruate 8,000 days in our lifetime on average. So when it's done, it's fabulous.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, just all of the supplies and things that you need to take care of that, now you don't have to worry about that, that's
Yeah, there's
wonderful,
some
but
good things.
yeah, certainly. So, in learning more about MiDOViA, I understand it as a force for necessary, holistic, and positive social transformation around menopause care in the workplace and beyond. So, I'm really curious to kind of dig into how you went about building it. So, my first question regarding that is how did you secure early funding or resources to start your venture?
Yeah, we're bootstrapping our organization. So we made a conscious decision not to receive funding. We didn't want any investors. We wanted to bootstrap it. So, and we're still doing that. Whether that will change, who knows? That being said, we do have a large scale network of support. I mentioned earlier that I had conversations with Deborah Garlick with Henpicked Menopause in the Workplace in the UK. And we decided early on when we started MiDOViA to partner with them. So although we didn't seek funding from organizations, we also made a very incredibly intelligent, in my opinion, conscious choice to partner with Henpicked Menopause in the Workplace. So we have a licensing agreement with them.
Mm,
To utilize their content. Our programming is really based off of their template, if you will, and the foundation that they've built in the UK and Australia and really globally across the pond. Henpicked has been working in the menopause space in the workplace for over 10 years. Their membership is 5 years old. And I think with the membership, they have over 600 members now and 160 organizations that are accredited. So it was important for us to fast track because we didn't have funding. We wanted to fast track. And what that meant for us is partnering with an organization that could allow us to do that. We knew that they have seen everything. We knew that their curriculum is evidence based, science backed. We knew that it was tested, that it was trustworthy, it had a good reputation. And so through that partnership, it has allowed us to fast track. And we have a global team of partners that we interact with on a weekly basis, more than a weekly basis, but guaranteed a weekly basis. And we really see them as an extension of our team. And I know that that goes in both directions. So if you ask me, how many employees do you have at MiDOViA? I would say less than 10, but then I would say, but in reality, we have close to 50 employees that we work with because we really see ourselves as one organization. Our programming itself is consistent across the globe with Australia, UK, Denmark, and the US, but it's culturally relevant by country as well. So that's the beauty of this partnership, is that we all have shared resources, so there's not a lot of redundancy, but we also know that each country is different, and we offer that lens and knowledge and bring that to the table. So we're really all learning from each other as well. And it's a beautiful, beautiful partnership.
Yeah, no, I love that so much. I think that that idea of I always butcher this quote, but I'm going to try and get it right. That idea of a rising tide lifts all ships, of kind of leveraging the resources that already were kind of put in place, or the progress that Handpicked in the UK and beyond were already making in this space, and recognizing that we want to bring that here, and we have ideas of our own that we can contribute and build on, and make this an even more impactful global initiative. And how can we share resources? How can we, I think what you mentioned too about ensuring that the offering that is offered in each country is culturally relevant and tailored to the specific needs of that country is so important to acknowledge, because again, it goes back to that idea of one size fits all. It doesn't work on the individual level, but it's not going to work on a global scale or a country level either, that we have
Right.
to acknowledge that there's differences
Mhm.
there. But I love the idea of leveraging the resources and sharing resources, and acknowledging that it's not about competition or about who can do it better, but it's about solving a global issue with as much compassion and care as possible. And that can only be done when we collaborate and when we work together. So I think that's really, really awesome. And I think it kind of builds into the question that I was going to ask, that, we've touched on a little bit, but how you went about building a team or a support network to bring your mission to life. It sounds like it was really just acknowledging that there were individuals and teams working on this issue, and how do we work together to ensure that our impact can be even greater. So with that too, I'm kind of curious how you spoke about the problem, and your vision to get others to believe in it and want to be a part of the solution that you were creating. How did you kind of establish that partnership, and iterate that it was so important to bring this work into the US?
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of convincing. If you've ever met Deborah, I'm hoping someday you do. She's an amazing woman, and she recognized the need. She knows that on a global scale, this is a need. No matter where you are, we go through menopause. If you have ovaries, you're going to experience menopause. And
Mhm.
if you are working through that transition, chances are that you're going to experience some challenges and you're going to need some support. Now, is that the same for every individual? No. Is that the same for every organization? No. But universally speaking, there's a need for this across the globe. So there really wasn't much convincing that there was actually a need there. It was really for us, and when I say us, I mean MiDOViA and Handpicked. For both of us, it was are are we Do we have a relationship with one another that is built on trust? And do we like working with each other? That was really important to us. And Deborah would say, "You're a hen. We knew that you were hens." And that's a term of endearment in the UK. It doesn't make much sense to us here in the US. But if someone says, "You're a hen" in the UK, that means you're one of us. We trust you. We know that you are going to deliver high quality work. We know that you have the same compassion and drive that we do. And so we're all moving this ship in the same direction. So for us, that's really what it came down to. We knew that the rest of the work was going to be done. We knew that we would all deliver. We knew that we could come together and make it happen. It really came down to that trust and mutual respect within the relationship. Once we knew we had that, we knew that we knew that we were going to make a heck of a difference here in the U.S. together.
Yeah, I really love that. I think that it's it seems simple in the sense of ensuring that there's trust and mutual respect being so foundational to the foundation of a relationship. But I think that sometimes when the actual kind of push comes to shove in terms of developing a partnership with somebody, especially if they have kind of already started working in this space and there are resources that you want to be able to glean from or share with them or kind of learn from what they've already been doing, there might be a kind of power dynamic that's established of, oh, we've already been working in this space and you're coming in. And so that kind of mutual respect piece might not be there. So I think your point of emphasizing that it is so important to have that mutual respect and build that trust first and foremost, knowing that you both have the skills to get the work done and to create the change that needs to be made. Like you just said, like we knew that that was a given, that we were capable and we were both driven by the same vision. But if the trust and mutual respect wasn't there, we knew that that wouldn't be possible to achieve in the way that we wanted to bring that vision and mission to life. So I think reminding our listeners that it's not necessarily about working with someone who is, like, I think when we think about networking too, it's not just about connecting with the person who's most quote unquote powerful or successful. It's connecting with the person that sees you for who you are and for the value that you bring to the table, and you also acknowledge theirs, and you recognize that we can do so much more when we acknowledge that and acknowledge that we both have value, and how can we leverage each other's unique strengths to create much more meaningful impact. I really, really love that
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah. When the mutual passion is there, we can do great things together. You're right.
Yeah.
It's not a competitive environment. It is a collaborative environment. And how can we reach more, better, faster because there's a need there? And
Hmm.
we need to pay our bills. We need to make money, but ultimately that wasn't the focal point for us either. And it still isn't. It's let's do the right thing. This will work out. We know, we know that we'll work that out. But what's in front of us today and who can we help and how can we do it best together is really the ultimate goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And to kind of build on that and to bring this episode to a close, what advice would you offer to someone with an entrepreneurial mindset and desire to do impactful work and make a change in their community or field, kind of based on what you've learned through your experiences with MiDOViA?
You know, um, two things I would say. Don't let fear get in the way because oftentimes fear creates doubt and that doubt stops us. It's the little voice in our head that tells us that we're not good enough, we can never happen. Turn it off. There's an off switch. Turn it off and move with the fear. I think fear is okay. That little bit of anxiety and butterflies in our tummy are okay. Move with it. Don't let it stop you. I
Hmm.
think I would also say if you don't have a little bit of that fear going into something, are you really biting off all that you can.
Mhm.
Sometimes fear is good because that means that you're getting ready to do great things. And that's exciting. So I would say, don't let fear get in your way. And then I would say, don't try to be 100% ready to launch anything because even 3 years into it, 5 years into it, you may still not feel like you are completely ready and prepared because times change and things change and we have to pivot and we have to reintroduce new things and it's ever changing and ever evolving. You'll never be fully ready. Lean into it and trust that your work ethic, your knowledge, your experience, your network, your partnerships will help get you there.
Yeah, I love both of those pieces of advice. I think something that I used to have to remind myself a lot of when I was playing sports was I would get really nervous, especially before I used to run cross country, and I would get very nervous before races because I don't know why they have to start the races with a gun going off. Like, it's just so scary. But I would feel so anxious and nervous, and I would have to remind myself that if I wasn't fearful in just the tiniest capacity, I don't think that that means like I would remind myself that because I'm feeling scared, that means that I care and that means that I want to do a good job. And the same thing happens sometimes with school when before I turn in an assignment that I've worked really hard on, and there's a little bit of fear there of, okay, is this good enough? But if I wasn't a little bit fearful, I don't think that that means, like you said, that I bit off as much as I could chew,
Yeah.
or that I care and that I'm building towards something that is meaningful. So I love that perspective. And then also what you were saying in terms of not letting yourself feel like it has to be perfect to make an impact is also so important because I think as someone with perfectionist tendencies, I'm sure that a lot of our listeners have this as well, that it can feel like it has to be perfect before anyone can see it or before it can make the change that my broader vision has in terms of I want to make such an impact. That means that along the way, every duck has to be in a row. It has to be perfect. But I think reminding yourself that you just have to make it exist first and you can make it good or
Exactly.
perfect later
Mhm.
is so important because if your long-term vision is to close an equity gap or to make a positive change in the lives of not only women and those that experience menopause, but those that are in relationship with them or that work with them in the workplace or that interact with them in their daily lives to make their lives easier as well, that's a huge endeavor. And so you just have to start doing it because the longer you wait and the longer you um, put off, trying to make it perfect before you actually, put it out in the world, the longer that more individuals are going to not get the support that they need. So for anyone in working in any space, just I think that advice that you offered in terms of making it exist and then making those tweaks and adjustments as new resources come in, as new evidence comes in, if you're working at kind of a health equity gap or issue here, like you are here, you're going to need to make changes. So acknowledging that, but just recognizing and trusting that you have the work ethic, you have the skills, you have the values
Right.
now to bring it to life.
Trust in yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. This was such a valuable conversation. I learned so much, and I will definitely be taking those pieces of advice into my daily life in all things that I do. But I can't wait to continue to see MiDOViA grow and to learn more about what you're doing as those needs might change, as new kind of legislation comes in, like you were pointing to. And I'm so inspired by the work you're doing, and I know that our listeners will be as well. So thank you again for coming on today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Her Entrepreneurial Rise podcast. The Her Entrepreneurial Rise podcast was founded, hosted, and produced by me, Kellen Tamarian, president of the We Lead Student Board, with support from the Burke Center for Entrepreneurship in the Foster School of Business at the University of Washington. I'm so grateful to have you along for these conversations, amplifying the stories of impact-minded women and gender-expansive innovators whose ventures and life's work shine a bright light on the radical possibility of entrepreneurship as an engine for positive social impact. If you'd like to learn more about the entrepreneur or leader featured in this episode, their journey, business, and mission, be sure to check out their website and social media platforms, all linked in the show notes. There you'll also find a list of the statistics, articles, and resources mentioned in this conversation for your further research and exploration. To stay connected with the Her Entrepreneurial Rise podcast and the Women's Entrepreneurial Leadership Program at the Burke Center for Entrepreneurship at the University of Washington, follow us on social media and visit our website, both linked below. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please rate, review, and share the podcast with a friend, classmate, or fellow believer in the power of entrepreneurship to spark positive change. Your support truly means the world and is the best way to help grow the show. I'm so happy you're here and part of the Her Entrepreneurial Rise community. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.